Ladies and gentlemen, mesdames et messieurs, I'm joined here for what's potentially a very interesting panel. And because we've got such a stellar group of people to speak to the subject from a few different points of view, I have tremendous confidence that it is going to fulfill expectations. I am told that I can trust you all to have read the appropriate biographies in the biographies section of the conference guide, and that I need not give fulsome introductions because all of you can read. So instead, I'll just briefly say that the running order is going to be Ed Williams here on my right, followed by Dave Longmuir at the far left end of the table, with Konstantin here on my left finishing up for us. I think we've got ample time for questions, and I look forward to having lots of questions. And I've also had a very stern warning that we are going to have a hard stop at just about 5 o'clock. So what I'd like is Ed to kick off. Ed's going to speak from the lectern. And Ed, crack on.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Well, thank you very much for inviting me today to this prestigious event and talking to you. And talking about the topic of disinformation, deception, and misinformation. Now, to the general public, the notion of seeking information advantage on the battlefield, of fighting information wars, is a fairly novel concept. It conjures up images of ISIS or Al-Qaeda videos or Russia and Putin-directed social media campaigns. Of course, the truth is that deception has always been one weapon in the armory of the military and state. We're 75 years on from one of the most ambitious and devastatingly successful examples in recent history, Operation Fortitude. Deception is as old as warfare itself. But some things have changed. The channels and techniques have shifted dramatically with digital. Networks and the Internet of Things has increased our vulnerability, and weaker states militarily are able to project a larger shape through cyber operations. But moreover, public attitudes in respect to the use of deception are being tested in a way they never have before. In the past, it was much easier to control the message and control the media. In the era of Twitter, you can't say that with any real confidence anymore. Imagine the innocent tweet from Kent if we tried to pull off Operation Fortitude today. Has military spending come to this? Inflatable tanks. Hashtag Tory cuts. Communications is now horizontal. It's not vertical, and the age of deference is dead. There is cynicism and suspicion of the old power structures, this traditional pyramid of hierarchy with elites on top has been upended. We see the mass now shaping the world like never before through horizontal digital networks and loose value-based affiliations. The hive mind of the internet, or if not that, Bellingcat or its equivalents, are constantly scouring public information for legitimate journalistic reasons and to achieve state advantage. More fundamentally, as we'll see, the overhang of Iraq and the run-up to war means that much of the public still are deeply skeptical about the government or its proxies making the case for conflict. Now, to get into my remarks, I always like to come to these discussions from the perspective of data rather than opinion. What do people really think? And when it comes to the question that we're discussing today, attitudes to the use of misinformation and deception, the results are very nuanced indeed. With peace and war blurred, what permission is there to use deception in this grey zone? Does permission change during times of peace versus war? Can you deceive your enemies while retaining public trust? Which spokespeople do you deploy to deceive, and what channels do you use? So just a fortnight ago, we did some polling on just these questions with a nationally representative sample of Britons. Now look, a context point first. This is not a definitive picture of how the public feel about specific tactics required to win on the information battlefield. More research is required here. We asked these questions at a time of relative calm from a national security point of view. And I've seen in research I've done in this space in the past, views shift depending on the public's threat perception at the moment you ask the question. But the results do, though, clearly point to a higher level attitude to deliberate subterfuge and the profound risks the military and other arms of national security take when deploying deception, the biggest being, of course, public trust becoming collateral damage. So, to the data. The first question, in some respects, is the most important question. Do the British public trust the British military? The answer, if you benchmark against others, as you can see here, is a very, very solid yes, with 60% saying they trust our military to do what is right. And within that 60%, 33%, a third, saying they trust the military a great deal. Now, important to note here, this isn't a binary question, it's a 9-point scale, and it's a question we've asked over 20 million times, it's my firm, over the last 19 years. And you can see the military is nearly twice as trusted as the British government, more trusted than NATO too. There aren't actually many institutions that score higher than 60%. The monarchy, yes. The BBC, often. Sometimes elements of the national security apparatus. But why does trust matter? Why is this score important? Well, if reputation is the rear-view mirror, trust is a predictor of public support for your future actions. It allows you to take risks. A score of 60% means the British military starts on a strong foundation. But what can you do with this trust? Does it follow that because 60% of the public trust the military, you have a similar number supporting the use of deception? Well, yes and no. Yes, in general terms, more than half of the public understand that it's better to keep something from someone in order to protect them, to keep troops safe in a conflict situation, for example. And they get that you have to achieve strategic military goals sometimes that require you to omit or deceive. But there is no free pass here. It really does depend on circumstance. And as you can see in this slide, just over half of people are comfortable with deception to support a secret mission, or even if couched under the banner of protecting national security. But the public are pretty savvy here. They make a distinction between these circumstances versus a terrorist threat or real-time terrorist attack. In these situations, they want facts and they want information. They do not want alternative facts and disinformation. What's even more interesting here is the final bar, if you can make it out on the screen. Less than a quarter think it's okay to not be completely honest if the country is on the brink of war. That, in my mind, is the long tail of Iraq and the case for war, including the 45-minute claim. The public have got long memories. So look, we've established that the military is quite highly trusted, certainly in relative terms, and that the public understand there are certain circumstances in which you have to deceive. But if the military was to share intentionally inaccurate information, does it matter where they do so? Are social media channels less trusted and therefore a better venue for lying, carrying less reputational risk if you get found out? No, not a bit. It actually doesn't matter whether you use an official Twitter account or a fake one, or if you put it out through the BBC or through newspapers. The public consider a lie a lie. Channel doesn't matter. Don't think you can get away with deceiving on social media because it's a morass of truth, lies, and stuff mixing the two. It really counts in the same way for the public. You can see in this slide also the conflict at the heart of public opinion on this topic. We know the majority accept that sometimes you have to lie, but look at the attitudes to who delivers the lie. They don't really like anyone doing it. And if they were forced to choose, they prefer someone in uniform. I mean, put it another way, someone in uniform is the least acceptable in the eyes of the public. So it should come as no surprise then, in this context, that concealing information or deceiving does come with a price. And the price is felt most by the least trusted institution that we measure, the government. We know that if an arm of the state hides information, it isn't the organisation that gets blamed, it's the government writ large. People think of government in the context of a kind of big umbrella with all the different institutions, including the MOD and the military, underneath. If information is concealed or deception occurs, there's a potential cost to the mothership. 3 out of 4 people say it decreases trust in government, and 2 in 3 says it makes them wonder what else the government is hiding if they find out that you've been lying. It also risks exacerbating the polarisation we are experiencing in Britain today. Over a third of people say it makes society more divided and increases any propensity for protest or civil disobedience. In short, by the government and military using disinformation and deception, you might win a tactical military victory, but you risk losing the wider battle for public confidence and trust, which you need. The political reaction may well be then greater restrictions in policies and permissions, inhibiting your ability to deliver effectively in the future. However, it is possible to make deception more palatable. Come clean. Be honest after the fact. Not 30 years, perhaps not 30 minutes, but certainly within a realistic time that means the lie or the deception still has salience or recall with the public. Over half say that if the government tells the truth after a deception relating to national security, it makes that deception more acceptable. Not only that, and this is surprising, it actually builds trust, with over a third saying they would trust the government more if it came clean. Not that I'm making the case, you understand, a lie to rebuild trust. That would obviously be completely daft and counterproductive. Now look, my final point, because I'm running out of time, is an important point to round off my remarks. There is one area where the public feel very strongly that misinformation and deception should not be used, and that is to cover up funding, resourcing, and capability gaps. The public don't like shadow puppets. They don't like digital hands in pockets declaring stick 'em up. We would rather that the military was properly funded. The public would prefer that you had the right equipment and the right numbers. Nearly 3/4, you can see on this slide, would believe the military should get the right funding and therefore not have to rely on deception tactics if those deception tactics are papering over the cracks. This is an important message to land with whomever becomes the next Prime Minister. So to conclude, you, or many of you in the room, the British military, are trusted by most people and highly by a third. The majority understand that there are some exceptional circumstances where you have to deceive. Furthermore, I'd argue that there is a spectrum of action from a big lie to a small-scale tactical omission that would yield different public responses. However, any deception comes at a cost. If deception is used to cover up gaps or to project a military capacity that we simply don't have, you risk losing the strong public support you have today, and with that, your ability to act effectively. And to quote Major General Catherine Toohey, who spoke earlier today, you can't surge trust. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Ed, for that practical framework for UK disinformation. Those of you in the UK forces who had been hoping to get some disinformation on feel appropriately warned, and you've got a lot more shaping to do before the British people will accept psyoping our own side, I think is a fair summary. Right, Dave, can you take us in a different direction now, please?
Thank you very much. So first of all, may I take the opportunity to say thank you for allowing me to attend and talk at the Land Warfare Conference this week, especially as we're commemorating the 75th anniversary of the D-Day landings, where the term, which we now commonly refer to as information warfare, was interleaved within the deception plan for the Allied landings in Normandy during June of 1944. For me, this was a culmination of information manoeuvre. It enabled operational freedom of action and information advantage while denying the same to our adversaries. As Lynette said, I'm going to come at it from a slightly different angle. So as a bit of background, I left the military last year after quite a long and sometimes exciting career. Towards the end of it, I spent my last couple of years within MOD main building, working with our partners across government, our intelligence agencies in north and south of the river and in the West Country. That gave me a really good insight into what I truly believe is the right direction that we're going in within information warfare, information manoeuvre, and information advantage. I also believe that information, and it's been referred to before, is the current arms race. I'm a firm believer that it will still be the next arms race as well. Now, we all get frustrated at times within our jobs, and during that last couple of years before I left the service, there were some frustrations within that. And I'm going to echo something that General Lamb said earlier on when he posed the question, and I'll put it into a slightly different context. He said that everyone is agreed on what is needed to do. Now we just need to find out how to do it. Okay. There are many reasons why we get frustrated with taking this information warfare manoeuvre advantage, a joint message forward. Some of that can be down to the political posturing, some of it can be down to resources, including finance. It could be the changing face of conflict. It could be our ethical approaches, which are sometimes, if not most often, different to our adversaries. And it can also be down to both the joint and the single services priorities. That said, now I've moved across to industry, I feel the same frustrations at times trying to deliver the capabilities that you guys need. With the greater understanding of the information edge, which is to help make informed decisions faster as a result of high-speed, interactive data reporting and analysis, and how it is employed in the joint environment, we can more clearly articulate strategic, operational and tactical level requirements. We know how these influence capabilities, in particular with reference to kinetic and non-kinetic effects, achieve an intelligence-led capacity for commanders. And that allows them to really own the operational environment. For me, the key point here is to clearly define to industry the defence requirements and effectively demonstrate to our most important customers that as a collective, we truly understand their operating environment and fundamentally understand the importance of moving away from stovepipes of excellence to true domain capability. Information warfare, through its subdomains of electronic warfare, communications, cyber, signature management, information operations and intelligence, provides the fundamental conditions for a commander to understand the operational environment, to set actions, to establish the preconditions for achieving objectives, both in dominating the domain and denying it to the enemy. These conditions allow tactical level commanders to react to threats in real time, both by kinetic and non-kinetic means, with the operational advantage. Enduring information warfare realistically performs a supporting commander's role to the kinetic operators in their own domains. This position does not denigrate the role, it highlights its importance as being an integral part of the commander's effect in all domains. Without it, prior planning is not possible, tactics, training, procedures are not established, understanding of the enemy is not possible, and nor is the establishment of the capabilities required to achieve success in the battle space. Integration of information warfare and their subdomains enables a commander to prevent the event, from manoeuvre alone to denying the enemy freedom of action, and enabling a networked, information-led fighting force capable of defeating current and next-generation threats. but the subdomains cannot achieve this alone. It's recognised that we must protect our individual sovereign capabilities, and the need for a joint approach and agreed standards between nations has never been more important. I work closely within FVEYS community. I'm involved in following land, SEMA, electronic warfare and signals intelligence, alongside high-grade encryption programs within Australia, Canada and the UK. The end state and outcome of each program is almost identical. However, these are quantifiable differences in each program which requires stovepipe procurement, and this has a potential to reduce interoperability or push that issue further down to the right where it becomes another problem to solve. What is not always clearly evident is any reference to what the requirement is other than what's in the physical space. As an example, size, weight and power of a capability can now be more important than what the effect of that capability is designed to do. We talk about it in forums like this, okay, but we don't actually see it, and it gets lost in the procurement process. One of the challenges when operating in a hostile environment has been how to collect information, enrich the decision-making process, and disseminate actions. Traditionally, the process has involved a human in the loop. However, this will change due to the data paradox. The sheer volume and velocity of data aids analytics, while at the same time provides our adversaries with a wealth of opportunities. I would suggest we now present the case for better and more focused machine learning within electronic warfare and the other domains to aid the warfighter, and also whilst trying to frustrate our adversaries. And this is not an area of importance just for our collective capabilities. The area of focus must be driven at the highest levels of government and shared across our allies and partners. The responsibility to secure our information, to understand its use, and to identify what is misleading is critical in this era of a data-rich information age in which the combined power of exponential growth in computer capability, data, and digital connectivity is fundamentally shaping almost every facet of modern life. There must be the ability and agility to recognise, meet, and counter threats, whether they're internal or external, covert or overt. We must identify the scale, type, and complexity of these threats and be positioned with a whole-of-government approach. For this to be achievable, the end state, and those are two critical words, the end state, what we're trying to achieve. So for this to be achievable, the end state of this approach, as we can see by the attendance of this conference, alongside the ongoing bilateral and FVEYS and beyond working groups, must include our partners across government, partners across industry, academia, and our intelligence agencies. The lessons learned and identified from this need to be flowed down to the single services, and that is then followed by continuous and progressive education. So for me to close, I refer back to the upcoming commemorations for the operation in 1944. Information warfare and information advantage is not new. However, it is more relevant today than ever before. It requires a cultural, social, and educational transformation and a conceptual foundation that puts information advantage at the heart of 21st century deterrence, campaign design, doctrine, and policy.
Thanks, Dave, for making clear that all of the things we're talking about here around information advantage are not some exotic, separate thing, but are integral to, integral to warfighting and part of the exercise of armed force. In particular, the idea that interactivity is important, that just because you want to do something doesn't mean your rivals or your enemies will permit you to do it. It was really useful. Now, Konstantin has promised me that he's going to be very different from everybody else. And I really appreciate that, because the last thing we'd need is a carbon copy of what has gone before. And so far, we've had a study in contrasts. So, Konstantin, can you give us even more contrast than we've had so far?
Lynette, thank you very much. 3 preliminary remarks. First of all, you may infer from my name that I'm German. I'm not. I'm a typical child, or rather grandchild, of the Russian Empire, with my Polish, German, Swedish, Russian, and even Italian ancestors, mostly serving in the Imperial Army. It's a heritage name, and even my German is nicht so good. Number 2, I would like to thank Rusi for this invitation, and especially thank it for permission not to use PowerPoint. And basically number 3, I'm going to speak in my personal capacity, although I was born in Moscow, but I'm based in Vilnius now, covering the Baltic states and writing columns about Russia from Vilnius in Lithuania. And my grades after I discharged from the National Army Service many years ago was first lieutenant, so I'm really grateful to Rusi again for the opportunity to speak to so many generals and colonels. I never thought I'm going to say anything important to such highly placed people when I was a lieutenant. I'd like to talk about the Kremlin messaging as it is seen both externally and internally. And I'm talking about a very broad set of messages that are being used both in wartime and in peacetime. And the important thing to understand, and we have limited time, is that, and that's probably a very important first thing that needs to be noted, and that is that the kind of message that the Kremlin delivers via RT and all sorts of other much more effective, actually, channels is exactly the same that's being imparted on the Russian audience at home, via state television, via the internet, via whatever, social networks. I.e., it is an integrated message. It is a global worldview. And when you have to, when you do the same thing for external internal consumption, that's very convenient. You don't have to split your mind in two. So I'd like to try and imagine that essentially what the Kremlin messaging is, what the propaganda messaging is it's salesmanship. And there are 3 wares that the Kremlin tries to sell, both to the Russians and to the world. Number 1 is cynicism. Number 2 is conspiracy theories. And number 3 is naked interest, which is, of course, linking to the first. I'll try to be, in a very brief way, more sort of precise about what I mean. Cynicism. Basically, the idea of all the outlets that broadcast, in a broad sense, both domestically and internationally, is that all Western talk of democracy and transparency and human rights, it's all just talk. It's all window dressing. There are no values. Well, you tell us that there is corruption in Russia. Oh, there is corruption everywhere. There was a British MP's expenses scandal. How about corruption in the UK? Oh, you say Putin is around for too long. Well, look at Angela Merkel. She's been around for nearly 15 years now and going on. So this idea that you can't trust the idea of democracy, and by extension you can't trust democratic institutions, is very strong. And I think it works pretty effectively in Russia to a large extent because Russians don't travel. Everyone laughs at the Americans that they, whatever, 20% or 30% of them have passports. I mean, in Russia, it's probably under 20. Number 2, conspiracy theories. That is also quite an effective tool, especially in Russia, Again, because people don't travel, people don't know much, don't know anything pretty much about the West the moment you get out of Moscow and St. Petersburg. So conspiracy theories. That is important because that reflects the worldview of the Kremlin. Basically, it's not some propaganda outlet like Channel 1 of Russian television or RT telling you that nothing is ever accidental in this world. Everything is run by the Freemasons, the Bilderberg Club, the Trilateral Commission, the royal family, whatever. This Lyndon LaRouche type of things. The interesting thing is that that is what people in the Kremlin believe, most of them being former intelligence operatives. And it's not for nothing that RT sends out its correspondent, probably the only publicly financed network in the world, sends its correspondents to wherever the Bilderberg Club holds its annual meeting. And they fly in cranks from all over the world to comment on this very, very important global event. It works with parts of the audience, especially on the extreme left and extreme right specters of public opinion. And the idea is, of course, is that promotes expanding these sectors that eat up at the center. Number 3, talking about naked interest. Yeah, everything is always about money. So forget about this democracy thing. Let us talk about Nord Stream 2. Why you, the Germans, are basically not gobbling up this idea that you're going to have a lot of cheap Russian gas. Not so cheap, it doesn't matter. Sanctions. Oh, well, you know, the Dutch producers of pork are suffering. Why don't we help the Dutch producers of pork and forget about Ukraine, which is anyway run by fascists? And I think that this talk about money also is hitting hard. I mean, I worked in the corporate sector. It works with a lot of people in business. I mean, they do not have probably enough leverage to lift sanctions, but that is what we hear a lot at foreign investor meetings and things like that. But again, it would be wrong to suggest that the Kremlin is all very systemic, because the whole idea is that you have a mixed bag of goodies, completely postmodern. It doesn't matter what works. Everyone is talking about the Kremlin's support for the right-wing parties, like, I don't know, Alternative für Deutschland in Germany or whatever. Well, they're equal opportunity underminers. They can work with Die Linke in the same Germany if Die Linke goes up. I mean, I think that this idea that you take whoever is dissatisfied with Western system and promote their message is extremely important. I'd say that basically the idea that Russia is this kind of value-based stronghold of traditional Christian values is being pushed very actively, both domestically and externally. However, if you look at the way the Russian government financed a global left-wing forum, the so-called Global Youth Festival in Sochi last year, it's not a problem for them to work with the anti-clerical Western left. Not at all, as long as it's anti-Western. And here we come to a very important idea. Everything that underpins the messages can be summed up in a very, very easy way. It is anti-Americanism and, broadly speaking, anti-Westernism. So whoever is the enemy of the West is our friend. And in this respect, it's really whoever. And I have some really interesting example from my personal life. I'm based in Vilnius. You cannot imagine what are the main anti-Lithuanian Facebook pages that spring up all the time. They're in Polish language. And they are all about how Poland should recoup Vilnius, which, well, used to be Polish in terms of population, at least. Complicated history, let's forget about it. It's a capital of Lithuania. So, for you, the idea especially those who are from Europe. The idea that Poles could be somehow agents of Russian influence may sound weird, but it's easy for the Kremlin. The Polish minority is being targeted to undermine the Lithuanian state. I mean, it's resilient, but what I'm saying is that it's equal opportunity undermining, as I said. Penetration goes at all sorts of levels. Again, from my personal experience, parents' publics on Facebook can suddenly explode in political messaging if it is about, for example, Russian minority in Lithuania. And it's just about school kids. So the last two things I want to say is that it can be easily, because it is such a flexible and principled system. The principle is that there are no principles. It is an enduring system. Message can be changed any time, as it is with Ukraine after the election of President Zelensky. Before that, it was a fascist anti-Semitic junta running the government in Kiev. After Zelensky, who is Jewish, was elected, that same night, Russian propaganda outlets, first domestically, now externally, started to put out the message, oh, Ukraine is going to be very anti-Semitic because the new government is going to be so incompetent that people will start hating Jews. Imagine that's in a few hours. I think that the last thing I want to say is that it is, to the extent it works only because when the Kremlin talks in its multitude of voices, it always talks about values. And the values you may not like, but it's value-based. It's undermining values, not undermining information, not undermining even some specific policies. It's undermining values. That is what is important. And here I think I will stop.
Thank you so much, Konstantin. Our aim here was to discuss information advantage, and I think that some of the themes we've heard are going to be very useful for us to carry away with us. In particular, the role of deception and disinformation, our tolerance for conducting our own operations with respect to deception and disinformation. We've heard roughly what the industry standard is with respect to all this sort of thing. In particular, the idea that the state that is perhaps setting the pace in the infosphere right now, if I can use that bit of jargon, is using information space tools authentically, integrally, competently across a spectrum of conflict and across an information spectrum. And also, I think one of the things that stretches across a lot of what we've heard is that a clear understanding of interests and strategic objectives is very important to doing any of this. And once again, that the Russian Republic, arguably the foremost practitioner of this, has a clear view of its interests and objectives, and that is perhaps what enables them to be as integrated and as competent as they have been to date.